I'm leaving the Veneto to take a detour southwest to Lucca, once an independent city-state and another wealthy centre of trade and agriculture. I'm coming to visit a garden that was built on the proceeds of a very specialised, very local product. The reason why I'm making this journey to Lucca is that it shares lots of similarities with the Veneto because it's an independent state that had a lot of wealth, but it was tiny. Despite this, it had its own ambassadors to the court of St. Petersburg and Versailles, and that wealth was based on two sources. One was banking, and the other was silk. Today, visitors come to Lucca to admire its medieval architecture. It is a calm, beautifully preserved town. But its history is founded on hard trade. 800 years ago, Lucca led the world in silk production and pioneered new spinning technology. Lucca's silk merchants, such as Giovanni Arnolfini, seen here in the famous painting by Jan van Eyck, grew enormously rich on the trade of the finest silks and silk velvets. These merchants built themselves summer houses outside the city. And by the middle of the 17th century, these villas in the hills increasingly sported superb gardens. In 1651, one of Lucca's wealthiest silk merchants of all bought himself the title of Count Orsetti and built this stupendous villa and garden. But despite the newly ennobled Count Orsetti's wealth, and despite the opulence of his gardens, the villas of these Lucchese merchants were still essentially highly productive farms, and they all shared the same layout. They're all north-south. They all have their good cereal ground below, going down, sweeping down gently in a slope. Behind them, they had their olive trees and their orchards and their woods. And then right in front of the house and to the side, they grew vegetables. And it was a format they all followed. And in the middle of the farmhouse, they all have one big room with windows to the front and the back, so they could see, they could look out on their land, because it's all about money. But in the kernel of all these places, they're working farmhouses. Villa Malia, then known as Villa Orsetti, follows the Baroque fashion for a series of garden rooms, each designed to surprise, delight, and entertain the visitor. But nothing delights or entertains me more than these breathtaking hedges. That is fantastic. Incredible canyon created by the hedges and the path. It's an unlikely comparison, but it's exactly the same impression you get when you first go to New York. And these enormous buildings flanking the street, and it changes the way that you view a street and here, a garden path. If you look at the trees, they're full-blown oak trees, clipped to hedge form. See, for me, this is worth crossing the world just to see this. It'll last the rest of my life. The language of Baroque symbolism and allegory would have been readily understood by all educated Europeans of the period, which was essentially the 17th and 18th centuries. So I have seen a number of similar river gods to these and the pool in the citrus garden in other gardens around Rome, Bagnaia and Caprarola. I've seen quite a few citrus gardens now, but I think this is my favourite. I love it. Just trying to work out what it is. And I think the rhythm is really important. You have the balustrades playing along, and then the pots equally spaced, and the colour of the lemons. And it's like a sort of Baroque fugue that's picked up and played on. But it's very practical. They would have sold the lemons. And, you know, the Lucans, they're merchants, and this is based upon an agricultural background. So you grow lemons and you sell them and it's a harvest. And the water was for growing fish, if you like. It's a fish tank, and it fed them. So the beauty is always practical. Maglia, like all the gardens of the Italian Baroque, was a place of performance and display. And perhaps that is the central key to understanding all the great Italian gardens throughout history. And here at Maglia, there is a perfectly preserved Teatro di Verdura, a theatre created entirely from topiary. This is terrific. This great building made out of yew and a little bit of box. And I know that it was really used. It's a real theatre. It's not a topiary, pretend theatre. They have performances here, and there's backstage, and so seats probably sat here. And you can imagine those wonderful ladies with their enormous, great silk dresses, local silk, I suspect, sweeping in. And you can get, whoops, be careful on there. If I come up here, getting soaked, I suppose this is the upper circle. Yeah, in here, we've got a backstage area. And I bet this is wonderfully cool in summer. And here with the wings, with all the different entrances. If we come through onto the stage and make my entrance. Ta-da! The terracotta statues date from 1700 and represent the stock characters from the Commedia dell'arte. These plays were frequently bawdy in tone and dramatized stock themes such as adultery, love, and the futility of old age. I have to say, it's just completely fabulous. And I want one in my garden, and I want it now. For Count Orsetti and his descendants, parties and plays continued at Villa Maglia right up to the end of the 18th century. Then their world collapsed. In 1796, Napoleon Bonaparte crossed the Alps and swept through northern Italy. His army captured Venice, ending 1,100 years of independence. In 1799, took Lucca. The opening lines of Tolstoy's War and Peace are, roughly, well, Prince, I see that Lucca and Genoa are now just estates of the Bonaparte family. And that was based on what happened here. Because in 1805, Napoleon, dishing out provinces like the gangster chief he was, gave to his sister the estate of Lucca. She came down, had a look, and decided that this villa, which was then called Villa Orsetti, was where she wanted to base herself. And she more or less turfed out the owners. She did pay them, but gave them an offer they couldn't refuse. And the Count Orsetti, in his fury and fear, I suspect, had her silver money melted down, made into a huge dinner service, which he then put on a cart and trundled across the front of the villa so that Elisa could see Maglia disappear. It might have made him feel better, but it didn't get him his house back. And Elisa turned her back on his Baroque formality and created instead an English landscape garden. This much more natural, informal style was then sweeping the continent and made greater use of imported plants and trees. Although the changes that Elisa made here were highly fashionable at the time, actually gardening was changing in a very profound way. And it was because new plants were pouring in from all over the world. And up till the 19th century, in Italy at least, architects and landscape designers controlled the way that gardens looked. But with this new material, it was plants themselves that became the most interesting thing. And we go from the age of the formal designer to the age of the plantsman.